Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our pre-recorded webinar today. With COVID protocols in place, we've decided the best route to keep our speakers safe today is to pre-record this webinar for you with our speakers in different locations. Today, we will be discussing SDS requirements and if you can use your international SDS in Canada. We'll be talking about the differences in a couple of the main sections of the SDS that are mandatory and some that the information is just simply missing from the safety data sheet and that a Canadian company would need to know. As this is a pre-recorded webinar, we will not be taking live questions today, but we do encourage you to send us an email with your inquiries and we will do our best to answer them once received. Our presenters today are myself, Kirsten Alcock, and Ivy Tang. I've been working for Deltek Laboratories for more than 22 years, with my main focus over this time has been the authoring of safety data sheets through various regulatory changes over the many years, consumer label requirements for the US and Canada, as well as transportation inquiries for TDG, DOT, IATA, and IMDG. Ivy, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Ivy and I have been with Deltek for 6 years in the product safety department here with Kirsten. I work with the GHS workplace regulations, consumer chemical regulations in both US and Canada, transportation such as TDG, DOT, and IATA, and the vaping regulations here in Canada as well.
As you can see, our contact information is available here on the screen. I'll leave it up for a moment so you can jot down our information. Please feel free to contact us with any of your questions that you may have. We have both our email addresses as well as our phone numbers on the screen for you here. We'll also have this available later on in the presentation. In this slide, we have some of the services that Deltek currently offers. We have 4 main departments here at Deltek: the Product Safety Department, Regulatory Affairs, Lab Services, and our new department, Client Services. We are your one-stop shop for everything regulatory. For example, if we are working on a safety data sheet for a product that contains flammable ingredients, not only can we do the flashpoint testing in-house, but we can take that information and create the safety data sheet or consumer label reports for you based on these results. It's easier for your accounting team to receive one invoice at the end of the month for testing and regulatory services rather than jumping around looking for separate companies to provide separate services. Our presentation today will be a very brief overview of what we are looking for when clients ask us if they can use their international safety data sheet in Canada or ask us just simply to translate it into French. Our presentation today will be approximately 15 to 20 minutes. And as discussed, this is the pre-recorded webinar, so please let us know in an email or phone call if you have any questions regarding the information today, and we'll do our best to answer them. One thing to note is that the slides will be made available after the presentation on SlideShare and our YouTube channel. There's no need to frantically write down your notes as we will share the slides to use with these important links for you to the regulations we'll be discussing today. We have a disclaimer here, basically indicating that what we are providing here is not legal advice. If you are uncertain of the interpretation of OSHA and WHMIS regulations, we would suggest you contact them directly. It can sometimes be rare to get things in writing, but we do suggest that when applicable. Some agencies are better than others when it comes to getting things writing to refer to later. So we can help you with that, or you can contact them directly. If you're concerned about confidentiality, we can contact them on your behalf. We do this for many clients who are not comfortable going to them directly. I provided the current information available at this point in time for contacting the appropriate country for further information. So let's jump into our presentation today. On this slide, I show a brief outline of our presentation today. We will touch very briefly on what an SDS is, what the GHS is, and to answer the question, can I use my safety data sheet here, followed by what is unique to us within Canada coming down the line as Canada expects to adopt GHS version 7 this year. I'm going to now turn the presentation over to Ivy to start us off.
Thanks, Kirsten. An SDS, or safety data sheet, is a document that discloses hazardous information about a chemical product. The information relates to health and physical effects. For example, is a product corrosive? Is it flammable? Is it toxic? The chemical composition of the product, first aid measures, how the product should be stored and handled, exposure values of the hazardous chemicals, basically information that's important to occupational health and safety. Up until recently, SDSs had to be updated every few years, usually 3. When your product formula changes, you may have to update your SDS because the hazards may change. In Canada, it is no longer a federal requirement to update your documents every 3 years, but some provinces still have this requirement in effect. Now, an SDS is intended to be used in the workplace, for example, a manufacturing floor in a production facility, so employees can have access to the information to protect them from harm. But SDSs have become kind of a catch-all document that even retailers like Amazon or Walmart will ask for from their vendors. Note that when chemical products are sold at a retail location, they are consumer products, not workplace products, and are technically exempt from needing an SDS. Nevertheless, retailers will more than often request an SDS anyways. In order to accurately disclose health and physical information about a chemical product, we classify it using an international standard known as GHS, or the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals. This way, all countries are on the same page when it comes to classification and labeling. GHS is managed by the United Nations, and the new revisions are published roughly every 2 years. To your right on the screen is the UN GHS Purple Book, which outlines all the available hazard categories, how to classify within each category, which symbols and statements to use, and references to test methods. Now, every country can choose which parts of GHS they want to adopt and implement. For example, under the skin corrosion and irritation category, the UN may suggest 3 subcategories, skin 1, 2, and 3. However, country A may choose to adopt only categories 1 and 2, while country B may choose to adopt all 3. Not only that, but different countries may be using different GHS revisions based on when they decided to adopt it. As a result, you can't use one SDS worldwide. Despite us drawing from the same standard, each country's regulations are different, resulting in a different SDS. Canada officially adopted GHS in 2015, and our system is called WHMIS 2015. WHMIS stands for Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System. Canada is currently using revision 5. Now, the US adopted GHS earlier on in 2012, and their system is called HAZCOM 2012, or Hazard Communication. They are using an earlier revision of GHS, revision 3. The EU, for example, is currently using a mix of revisions 6 and 7. Canada and the US recently announced that each country intends on moving forward with revision 7. Both have published proposed regulatory plans, and public comment closes in May. This update is expected to achieve the goal of aligning the US and Canada with respect to hazard communication. So with all these changes, does this finally mean that you can use your international SDS in Canada? Well, the answer is it still depends. Canada has a different set of requirements as to what must actually appear on the document. And as a result, you must make sure that the SDS contains that kind of information in order for it to be used and be compliant within Canada. Now, we will get into the details specific to a Canadian SDS. An SDS has 16 sections, and we will go through the relevant sections only. As a note, we will mostly be pointing out the differences between UN GHS Revision 3 and Revision 5, or US versus Canada.
So our SDS template follows Schedule 1 of the Hazardous Products Regulations. I provided the current website link below. Schedule 1 goes into great detail about what they call the information elements on a safety data sheet. The schedule itself provides information on all the required headings that must be on your safety data sheet, along with the specific information elements. Make sure that you check with your SDS authoring program you purchased to ensure that these headings and subheadings are being met. They must be there, and you must be using the terminology in Schedule 1 in English and Canadian French. There is a French link at the top of each website provided by Health Canada. As many of you know, there are a variety of ways to translate words, so the Canadian government has taken the guessing game away and provided the translated words for us in each individual section. Check your software provider to ensure that the proper government-approved statements are being used. If the information is not available, then simply place not available on your document or not applicable. You may not leave it blank. This is a mistake that we see on many safety data sheets when companies leave this section blank. Each specific element needs to be present and have a statement associated with it. When looking at your international safety data sheets that you'd like to use here, does it meet all these elements? In most cases, they do not, but let's go into a few of the main issues that we found when we received an international safety data sheet. Section 1 of the safety data sheet in Canada has 5 specific information elements, which I've placed above. A through E, product identifier, other means of identification, recommended use and restrictions on use, initial supplier identifier, and emergency telephone number, and any restrictions on the use of that number, if indeed applicable. One of the things Health Canada requests is that the Canadian address for your company or the address of the distributor in Canada is here. We understand that this is a point of contention with many of our clients, as some companies do not have this information or do not want to provide their distributor address. It is, however, a requirement, and you may wish to speak to Health Canada about this. We at Deltek cannot provide you an exemption on this. If you have an issue with this particular requirement, you will need to speak to Health Canada on this. We can help you understand the regulations, but we are not the regulators for Canada and cannot provide you with a specific exemption on this. An emergency telephone number is required on Canadian safety data sheets. Please ensure that this number can be used from Canada. If that emergency number is the main desk and their office hours are 9 to 5 p.m., you'll want to place that here. Although many companies put CANUTEC as their emergency number, CANUTEC is for transportation emergencies only, and you need to be a registered Canadian company to use that particular phone number. The CANUTEC number is only intended for dangerous goods spills on highways and in transport, so it should not be used for internal spills of your product. Section 2 of the safety data sheet is where you'll find the GHS classification for the product, the appropriate signal word, hazard statement, prevention, response, storage, and disposal statements. One thing to note here is that Canada has some unique classifications that would not be listed on an international safety data sheet. HHNOC and PHNOC. Some of you might be wondering what these are. So HHNOC refers to the health hazards not otherwise classified Category 1, and PHNOC refers to the physical hazards not otherwise classified Category 1. The US, for example, has merged these into one classification, HNOC, whereas Canada has further classified them into health and physical hazards. If you have a product that meets either of these categories, this needs to be spelled out in Section 2. HNOC and PHNOC and HHNOC are unique to Canada and the US. If you are shipping your product from overseas here, please ensure that you've included this information if that is applicable to your product. It is a requirement. Another thing to note, what GHS version statements are you using? When Canadian regulations refer to the GHS, what we're actually referring to is GHS version 5. I've added the little snippet here below to show you. This can be found in Part 1 of the HPR. Currently, the US is using version 3 statements. What country are you sending your safety data sheet from? Countries that have chosen to adopt GHS are very likely to be on a different version than what we're using here in Canada. Canada and the US are expected to move to version 7, and although there doesn't appear to be any differences I found in the health statements, there will be changes for physical hazard statements and classifications. So please keep that in mind. I've chosen to pick one classification where I know there are differences between Canadian and US regulations. This slide shows you the difference between statements from version 3, which is what the US is on, to version 5, which is what Canada is on, for corrosive materials classification. Although the classification criteria are the same between the two countries, the statement requirements are different. The Category 1 signal word hazard statement and symbol are the same, but as you can see, the prevention, response, and storage statements here are different. Please ensure that you are using the correct version if you are planning on selling your product to Canada. There are many other classifications that have the same issue. You will have to have a copy of the GHS version 3 and 5 to determine what the differences are between the two. Ensure that your statements are version 5 statements or you will be out of compliance with Health Canada, and this could lead to potential fines and further action requirements. One thing to note is that the US Department of Labor issued an OSHA instruction document which was effective on July 9th of 2015. In this document on page 5 and 6, the guidance indicates that the US HCS 2012 is based on GHS revision 3 from 2009. However, in the US, you are permitted to use more recent statements as long as the information does not contradict or cast doubt on OSHA required information. For more information on this, I've provided a link to the document so you can download it for your files. This document goes into further details on what is required. Please note that we are not here to discuss this document in detail, as today's webinar is to highlight what is required for your safety data sheet to be used in Canada. If you have further questions on this, you will need to contact your representative at OSHA. Let's jump ahead now to section 3 of the safety data sheet, where we see the most mistakes on documents entering Canada. Canada is very specific on their requirements for section 3. The chemical name, CAS, and concentration are required here. Canada recently changed the regulations to allow us to use weight ranges. As you can see here, the ranges were chosen by Health Canada. They're similar to the ones we were permitted under the old control products regulations, but there are more options here under the HPR. For example, in the past, we could use 60 to 100. That is no longer an option, and we must choose among 45 to 70, 60 to 80, 65 to 85, or 80 to 100. Many European SDSs that come over do not have adequate information here. We've seen very large ranges or just simply a greater than or less than sign. If you choose not to provide the exact ranges, you should be using one of these ranges unless you are claiming trade secret. I just wanted to quickly bring this to your attention. Although I see this very often, you may not start your range with a 0. I've spoken to Health Canada regarding this and received an email confirming this from them. Either something is in the product or it's not in the product. Starting a range with 0 would be a non-compliance in the eyes of Health Canada when you're disclosing a hazardous chemical in section 3 of your safety data sheet. The next biggest issue I see here, trade secret. Let's discuss this a little further. As I indicated on the previous slide, in order to use these ranges within Canada, we must claim them as a trade secret. A very large difference between Canada and other countries is how one claims trade secret. When I refer to trade secret of the ranges here, it doesn't require paperwork to Health Canada to make the claim. But, and a big but here, if you want to claim trade secret for your CAS number or your chemical name, you're required by law here to send in paperwork to make a claim for exemption. This is not free. There are fees involved with submitting your claim. If you need help submitting your claim, we can help. Out of curiosity, as I know you're wondering, what those fees might be. Here's the currently listed fee structure. This is something that changes year to year, so be aware of these changes. The amount actually went down this year. I'm now going to pass the presentation over to my colleague Ivy to discuss a couple other sections where we see the most mistakes on documents coming across the border.
Thank you, Kirsten. Right now, we'll talk about Section 8. Each province or territory in Canada has their own occupational exposure limits. The OEL is the acceptable upper limit of a concentration of a hazardous material in the air of a workplace. For example, if your product contains methanol, you must know the OEL because above the limit, it would be a toxicity hazard to the workers exposed to it. OELs are typically established by a province's Ministry of Labor. You must know which province your product will be sold in order to know which OELs to disclose on your SDS. Section 14 is for transport. Now, this section is actually not mandatory on an SDS, but we strongly advise that you have it completed correctly. Again, because the SDS has become a catch-all document for all applicable information, including transport. Canada follows the Transportation of Dangerous Goods, TDG, while the US follows 49 CFR. There are distinctions here, especially with the UN numbers and shipping names used. For example, the US has NA numbers like NA 1993 combustible liquid that is not applicable in Canada. The label placards for Canada can also be different from the US. Here's another example to be wary of. If your international SDS is meant for both US and Canada, for example, and you have section 14 listed, you must be aware of the differences. Here we see for class 3 products, Canada uses a red diamond and the US uses this black and white one. If you use the black and white one on a Canadian SDS, it would not be compliant.
Okay, I'm going to go through the next couple of slides very quickly. Section 15 is also technically not mandated, but it is section 1 should include information about the product as a whole. This is a section where you'll find information on our inventory lists. In the US, you have TSCA. In Canada, we have the DSL and the NDSL. This is something that you must know before you import your product. Please check with your chemists when you are in the formulation stage to confirm this. If you're trying to bring in something that is not listed, there are requirements for notification. Again, this is something that Deltek can help you with. We can help advise on what the trigger limits are and what the requirements are for the paperwork. If you need more information on this, we have employees on staff to definitely help you with this. Please send us a separate email about the presentation and we can help you determine your inventory status. I've provided the current list where you can find information if your chemical is listed. Lastly, let's discuss how old your safety data sheet is. Federally, the requirement to update your safety data sheet every 3 years was abolished, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to update your safety data sheet. There are some provinces that require the updated SDS. When we looked into it, the following provinces still require the updates: Saskatchewan, Yukon, the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and BC. There may be more now. You will need to determine which provinces you are selling to. If any information on the ingredients changes, you must also update your safety data sheet. If there's new significant data on your product or the ingredients within your product, you must update your documents. This is still why we insist on doing a three-year review. It is very likely that there is new information and new toxicological data.
As mentioned earlier in this presentation, Canada and the US are looking both to coordinate the adoption of future updates of GHS to ensure that hazardous communication requirements are aligned. Canada will be amending its Hazardous Products Regulations to align with the changes in both Revision 6 and 7 and Schedule 2 of the Hazardous Products Act, which outlines the hazard classes, will be based primarily on Revision 7. As such, suppliers and/or manufacturers may need to make changes to their SDSs and labels based on the new requirements in order to stay compliant. Major changes to the Hazardous Products Act and regulations include the adoption of a category for non-flammable aerosol, new subcategories for flammable gases, and updates to the required hazardous information elements on labels and SDSs. Major changes to the HAZCOM 2012 in the US include the addition of concentration ranges, new definitions for terms, and changes also to the flammable gases and aerosols. Now, currently, public comment closes May 19th for both countries. This is an extended date from the previous April 19th cutoff. So moving forward, we can expect Canada and the US to have SDSs that are more closely aligned than ever. But as we have demonstrated in this discussion, there are still differences that you need to be aware of. And these are the current links for further information on GHS Revision 7.
Thank you for your time today. On the next slide, we will provide our email addresses. Should you have any further questions about the material today, we'd be happy to consult with you further. Please note that we also recently moved, so if you have our old address on file, please update it to the new one. For those of you that joined late, no worries. The slides and presentation will be available on SlideShare and our Deltek YouTube channel. Subscribe and you'll find the notes there. Have a wonderful weekend and all the best from Deltek Laboratories.